People said the silver wolf had forgotten mercy. They spoke of glowing eyes that watched from the darkness beyond the trees, of silent footprints circling lonely cottages before dawn, of distant howls that made even seasoned hunters pull their cloaks tighter around their shoulders. Every broken fence, every missing lamb, every strange shadow crossing the moonlit hills eventually became the wolf's fault. Fear had a way of finding the easiest face to wear. Soon, the kingdom no longer called him a creature. They called him a curse. The king himself placed a reward upon the beast's head. Lord Garrick, commander of the royal hunts, swore before the court that the silver wolf would be dragged through the capital before winter arrived. Yet deep inside the oldest corners of the Greenwood Wilds, where ancient trees had watched kingdoms rise and fall, another story waited beneath the moss-covered stones. A story almost forgotten. One quiet healer would discover it. One wounded wolf would trust her. And before the final moon of autumn faded from the sky, an entire kingdom would learn that the greatest monsters were rarely the ones with claws. The kingdom of Ashmere stretched across gentle valleys, quiet rivers, and rolling hills painted with endless fields of barley that turned golden every summer. Stone villages rested beneath the shelter of distant mountains, their chimneys sending soft ribbons of smoke into the crisp morning air while church bells echoed peacefully through narrow streets. To strangers, Ashmere looked like a kingdom blessed by peace. Only those who lived there knew how quickly peace could disappear. Every evening, before darkness settled across the land, doors were locked. Children were called indoors. Windows were barred. No one willingly entered Greenwood Wilds after sunset. The forest began where the last farms ended, rising like a living wall of towering pines whose branches seemed to weave together high above the earth, allowing only scattered beams of sunlight to touch the moss below. Travelers often claimed the woods were strangely quiet. Birds would suddenly stop singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Old people whispered that Greenwood remembered everything. Every promise. Every betrayal. Every drop of blood spilled beneath its branches. Few believed such stories anymore. But no one dared test them. Not even Lord Garrick. Although he rode into the forest with dozens of soldiers, polished armor, hunting horns, and sharpened spears, even he refused to remain after nightfall. The forest belonged to something older than kings. Far from the villages, on the edge where cultivated fields surrendered to wild earth, stood a small stone cottage wrapped in ivy. Its roof sagged slightly beneath the weight of many winters. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the porch. Wildflowers surrounded the narrow path leading toward the wooden door. The little home belonged to Ilara. She lived alone. Not because she wished to. Because life had slowly taken everyone else away. Her father had been a woodcutter whose laughter once echoed through the cottage every evening. Her mother had healed villagers with herbs gathered from Greenwood itself. During the harsh winter 10 years before, illness swept through Ashmere faster than any healer could stop it. Within 2 weeks, the cottage became silent. Ilara had been barely 16. Grief could have hardened her. Instead, it softened every corner of her heart. Now, years later, she carried on her mother's work. She treated broken bones, mixed herbal teas for fevers, sat beside dying strangers so no one would leave the world alone. Many families tried to pay her with silver. She often accepted only bread. Or vegetables. Sometimes nothing at all. Kindness had become the only inheritance her parents left behind. Every morning before sunrise, she wrapped herself in a weathered green cloak, slung a woven basket over one shoulder, and disappeared into Greenwood. The villagers never understood why. "You'll end up feeding the wolves," an old baker warned whenever she passed. Ilara only smiled. "The wolves have never asked me for anything." The baker shook his head. "They won't ask. They'll take." She simply continued walking. Mist curled around her boots as she stepped beneath the first towering pines. Immediately the sounds of the village faded. Instead came different music. Water dripping from fern leaves. A distant woodpecker tapping ancient bark. The whisper of squirrels darting across high branches. The gentle rush of a hidden stream somewhere beyond the moss-covered stones. She breathed deeply. The forest smelled of damp earth, pine needles, mushrooms, and fresh rain. To most people it felt frightening. To Ilara, it felt like home. She knew where silverleaf grew after heavy storms. She knew which fallen logs hid healing mushrooms. She could recognize medicinal flowers long before they bloomed. Nature spoke quietly. Most people simply forgot how to listen. Hours passed peacefully. Her basket slowly filled with lavender blossoms, mountain thyme, foxglove roots, and bundles of white sage. Dark clouds gathered overhead. The afternoon light faded earlier than expected. A cool wind slipped between the trees. Then came thunder. Not loud. Far away. Like giant footsteps crossing distant mountains. Ilara glanced toward the sky barely visible beyond the thick branches. I should head home. The first raindrop landed on her cheek. Another struck the basket. Within moments the forest disappeared behind heavy curtains of rain. Water poured from every branch. The narrow paths became streams of mud. Wind bent young trees until they groaned. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the hills. The world turned silver for a heartbeat. Then dark again. Ilara pulled her hood tighter and hurried toward familiar ground. Halfway home, something stopped her. Not a sound. A feeling. The strange certainty that she was no longer alone. She slowly turned. Nothing. Only rain. Towering trunks. Mist drifting between the roots. She continued walking. Again. That same feeling. Someone was watching. Her fingers tightened around the basket. She forced herself not to panic. Animals often observed travelers. Deer. Foxes. Owls. Even wolves. She whispered softly, almost to herself. I'm only passing through. The forest answered with silence. Another flash of lightning split the sky. This time she saw it. Far ahead beneath the twisted branches of an enormous oak. Something pale. Far too large to be a deer. At first she believed it was a fallen tree trunk. Then it moved. Only slightly. A slow rise. A painful breath. Ilara's heart stumbled. She stepped closer. Rain blurred everything. Another flash illuminated the clearing. The shape became unmistakable. A wolf. Enormous. Its silver coat shimmered beneath the rain like moonlight trapped in fur. Even lying helpless against the roots, it was larger than any wolf she had ever imagined. One side of its body was stained dark with blood. A long black spear pierced completely through its shoulder. Its breathing came in slow, uneven waves. The earth beneath it had turned crimson. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This had to be him. The cursed wolf. The one whose head carried enough gold to feed an entire village for years. She took one careful step backward. The wolf lifted its head. Golden eyes met hers. Not wild. Not savage. Not hungry. Only exhausted. She expected a growl. Bared teeth. A final desperate attack. Instead, the wolf lowered its head once more. Almost as though it no longer possessed the strength to fear humans. Rain washed fresh blood down its silver fur. Its chest rose painfully. Again. Then slower. Ilara swallowed. No. She whispered under her breath. You've been hunted. She noticed the spear more carefully. Its shaft carried deep carvings. Near the iron blade. The royal hunting crest. Lord Garrick. A cold knot tightened inside her stomach. So the stories were true. The commander had finally found the silver wolf. Or almost. She slowly circled closer. Every movement careful. Every breath measured. The wolf watched her but never moved. Only its ears twitched weakly. She knelt several steps away. Its wound smelled wrong. Not simply blood. Something bitter. Poison. Black stains spread around the wound where healthy flesh should have been. If I leave. She murmured softly. You won't see tomorrow. The wolf blinked slowly. As though it understood every word. She closed her eyes. Every sensible thought urged her to stand. Walk away. Tell the soldiers where they could find him. Collect the reward. Buy medicine. Repair her cottage. Live comfortably for the first time in years. Instead, she reached into her basket, tore strips from her own cloak, and took one cautious step closer. The great wolf did not bare its teeth. It simply watched her with quiet, fading eyes that held something far older than fear. Above them, hidden among the rain-soaked branches, unseen shapes shifted silently from tree to tree. Golden eyes opened in the darkness. Watching. Waiting. Not a single leaf stirred beneath their careful paws. Ilara never noticed them. She noticed only the wounded wolf before her. And as thunder rolled across Greenwood once more, she placed one trembling hand against the soaked silver fur. The wolf closed its eyes. As though, for the first time since the hunt had begun, it finally believed it was safe. The rain did not ease when night settled over Greenwood. It grew heavier. Cold sheets of water crashed through the towering pines until the forest floor disappeared beneath flowing streams. Every trail Ilara knew dissolved into mud, and every flash of lightning painted the wounded wolf in pale silver before darkness swallowed him again. She remained beside him. The strips of cloth she had tied around the wound had already turned dark with blood. The poison worried her even more. She leaned closer, studying the spear. Its iron head had entered just behind the shoulder, missing the heart by little more than the width of 2 fingers. Whoever had thrown it had meant to kill with a single strike. When that failed, the poison would finish the task. Her hands trembled. Removing it too quickly would make the bleeding worse. Leaving it inside would allow the poison to spread. She closed her eyes for only a moment. "Please," she whispered, though she was no longer sure whether she was speaking to the wolf, the forest, or the heavens above. "Help me do this right." The wolf watched her quietly. Not once did it snap or growl. Slowly, Ilara broke several young branches and wrapped them around the shaft to gain a stronger grip. She breathed deeply, then pulled. The wolf's entire body stiffened. Its jaws clenched. A deep rumble escaped its throat, not a roar of anger, but the sound of unbearable pain. The spear slid free with a sickening scrape. Fresh blood poured onto the soaked earth. Ilara dropped the weapon and immediately pressed both hands against the wound. "Stay with me." Warm blood seeped between her fingers. The wolf's breathing became shallow. Its head fell against the roots. For one terrible heartbeat, she thought she had killed him herself. Then, a faint breath escaped his nose. Another. Still alive. She worked as quickly as she could, packing crushed yarrow into the wound before wrapping it tightly with clean linen from beneath her cloak. The rain helped wash away the poisoned blood, but the bitter smell still lingered. She looked toward the abandoned cart path leading deeper into the woods. Her cottage was far too close to the village. The soldiers would search there first. There was only one place hidden enough. The old stone mill. No one had entered it for years after the river changed course, leaving its great wheel frozen beneath creeping vines. Children believed ghosts lived there. Adults preferred not to argue. It stood nearly an hour deeper inside Greenwood. Too far to carry such a massive creature. She looked back at the wolf. "You'll have to walk." The great animal slowly opened his eyes. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, with painful effort, he planted one massive paw against the earth. His legs shook violently. He collapsed again. Ilara moved beside him. "You don't have to do it alone." She slipped beneath his shoulder, though she knew her small frame could offer little support to an animal nearly twice her weight. Yet somehow, the wolf leaned gently against her instead of crushing her beneath him. Together they took one step. Then another. The journey through the storm became painfully slow. Branches clawed at Ilara's cloak. Mud pulled at her boots. Several times the wolf stumbled, nearly falling into flooded hollows hidden beneath the leaves. Each time she refused to leave him. By the time the broken outline of the old mill appeared between the trees, dawn had begun to brighten the eastern sky. The building looked forgotten by the world. Its roof sagged beneath thick moss. Stone walls disappeared beneath climbing ivy. The water wheel no longer turned, its wooden paddles frozen in silence. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone and old timber. Dust drifted through narrow shafts of morning light. Ilara gathered dry branches hidden beneath the collapsed loft and coaxed a small fire into life. Golden light danced across the cracked walls. The wolf lay heavily near the warmth, his sides rising and falling with slow, exhausted breaths. For hours she worked without resting. She cleaned the wound again. Ground fresh herbs into a thick green paste. Boiled willow bark to ease pain. Mixed charcoal to draw poison from the flesh. Every lesson her mother had ever taught returned to her hands without effort. The wolf never resisted. Sometimes his ears twitched. Sometimes his tail gave the smallest movement. Always those golden eyes followed her. Watching. Learning. Trusting. Night came. Then another day. Then another. Outside, Greenwood continued breathing around them. Rain eventually gave way to soft autumn sunlight. Golden leaves drifted through the broken windows. Some mornings Ilara awoke to birds singing upon the roof. Other mornings the forest stood strangely quiet. As if listening. The wolf recovered slowly. He drank water from her hands before he trusted the wooden bowl. Later he accepted strips of cooked rabbit left beside him without hesitation. He still refused to let anyone else approach. Not that anyone knew where they were. At least, that was what Ilara believed. One afternoon she stepped outside carrying empty buckets toward the nearby stream. Fresh hoofprints covered the muddy ground. She froze. They had not been there yesterday. Someone had ridden close. Very close. She followed the tracks until they disappeared among the trees. When she returned, the wolf stood outside the mill for the first time. His wound remained wrapped, but he no longer leaned from weakness. Instead, he stared silently toward the forest. Every hair along his back had risen. His ears pointed forward. Listening. Ilara looked into the trees. "What is it?" The wolf gave no answer. Only a low warning rumble. Moments later, 3 deer stepped cautiously from the undergrowth. One limped badly. A deep cut marked its front leg. Normally deer fled the scent of wolves long before coming this close. Yet these did not run. The injured doe slowly approached until she stood only a few steps from Ilara. The wolf remained perfectly still. The doe lowered her head. Not in fear. Almost. In respect. Ilara stared in disbelief. She knelt beside the animal, cleaned the wound, wrapped it with strips of linen, and watched as it calmly disappeared back into the trees. The wolf looked after it without moving. Only then did Ilara notice something else. Flowers surrounded the clearing. Only days earlier the ground had been bare. Now white woodland lilies bloomed in places where autumn should have brought dying leaves. Bees drifted lazily from blossom to blossom. Butterflies danced through shafts of sunlight. Life itself seemed to gather around the mill. Each day brought another wonder. An injured fox arrived with a broken paw. A raven with a damaged wing perched upon the windowsill until Ilara treated it. Even frightened rabbits fed peacefully near the wolf while he simply watched them. The balance felt impossible. Predator and prey. Side by side. As though some forgotten law ruled this small clearing. Far beyond Greenwood. Another man watched the forest with very different eyes. Lord Garrick slammed his gauntleted fist upon a heavy oak table inside the Royal Hunting Lodge. Maps scattered across the room. Broken arrows lay beneath his boots. The silver wolf had escaped. Again. A young scout knelt before him. "We found blood, my lord." "And?" "It vanished after the storm." Garrick's jaw tightened. "I did not ask what vanished." The room fell silent. "We found human footprints beside the blood." Garrick slowly turned. "A hunter." The scout swallowed. "No, my lord." "A woman's." The commander said nothing for several moments. Then a cold smile spread across his face. "So?" Someone helped him. He lifted the black spear recovered from the forest. The dried blood along its blade had not belonged only to the wolf. Tiny threads of green cloth clung near the iron tip. A healer's cloak. "Search every village." His voice remained calm. "Every cottage. Every mill. Every shrine. I don't care if she is a widow, a child, or a holy woman. If anyone shelters that beast." His eyes darkened. "They will hang beside it." Word spread across Ashmere within days. Royal messengers nailed fresh notices to every village gate. A reward larger than most farmers earned in 10 years. Gold for the wolf. More gold for anyone protecting him. Fear began doing Garrick's work for him. Neighbors watched neighbors. Travelers questioned strangers. Even old friends whispered suspiciously behind closed doors. Ilara knew nothing of this. She remained inside the quiet mill, believing the forest itself had hidden them. Until one evening, as crimson sunset filtered through the trees, a slow tapping echoed against the weathered wooden door. Not hurried. Not frightened. 3 gentle knocks. Then silence. Ilara reached for the small hunting knife resting beside the table. The wolf rose immediately. Though still healing, he placed himself between her and the entrance. Every muscle along his shoulders tightened. Another knock. Soft. Patient. Ilara carefully opened the door. An old man stood beneath the fading light. His beard reached almost to his belt. A weathered walking staff rested in one hand. His grey cloak carried countless patches stitched over many years of travel. His eyes were younger than the mountains. He looked first at Ilara, then beyond her, toward the silver wolf. Instead of surprise, he bowed. A deep, respectful bow. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet weight of someone repeating words older than memory itself. So, the last guardian still lives. Ilara's breath caught. You know him? The old traveler smiled sadly. I knew his father. He lifted his gaze toward the wolf. And his father's father before him. A cool breeze drifted through the doorway. Somewhere high above the mill, unseen wolves answered one another with distant howls that rolled across Greenwood like echoes from another age. The old man's expression grew solemn. There is very little time. The first pack has waited many generations for someone like you. Before Ilara could ask what he meant, a hunting horn shattered the evening silence. Then another. Much closer than before. The silver wolf's ears snapped forward. The old man's face lost all color. They've found the forest. And somewhere beyond the trees, dozens of armored riders were already closing in. The first hunting horn had barely faded when another answered from deeper within Greenwood. Then another. The echoes rolled through the ancient forest like waves striking distant cliffs, scattering birds from the treetops. A flock of ravens burst into the evening sky, their black wings cutting across the fading sunlight. Inside the old mill, silence settled for only a heartbeat. Then everything moved at once. The silver wolf stepped away from the doorway and turned toward the back of the ruined building. His movements were no longer slow with weakness. Though the wound still marked his shoulder, strength had begun returning to every powerful stride. Ilara looked from the wolf to the old traveler. They're already here. The old man nodded. They have followed the blood, the broken branches, and the fear of men. Lord Garrick is many things. He paused. But he is not foolish. Outside, faint voices drifted through the trees. Soldiers. Still distant. Searching. The old traveler tightened the strap of his worn satchel. There is only one path left. The mountains. Ilara hesitated. My cottage. The words barely escaped her lips. Everything she owned remained there. Her parents' wooden table. Her mother's worn blanket. The tiny garden planted with herbs that had taken years to grow. The old man understood without another explanation. If you return. His gentle voice became heavy. You will lead them to the guardian. Ilara lowered her eyes. A cold ache settled inside her chest. She knew he was right. Some homes were not lost in a single day. Some were surrendered one painful step at a time. She took one last look around the forgotten mill. The fire still glowed softly beneath the cracked chimney. Her clay cup rested beside the hearth. Fresh herbs hung from the beams overhead. For only a few days, this broken place had almost begun to feel safe. Now, it too belonged to memory. She picked up her basket. The wolf was already waiting beside the rear doorway. Without another word, they disappeared into Greenwood. Night gathered quickly beneath the ancient pines. The forest seemed different now. Every snapping twig carried meaning. Every distant movement forced Ilara to stop and listen. The old traveler walked with surprising confidence despite his age. He never searched for paths. He simply knew them. Sometimes he placed his weathered hand against the bark of enormous trees before quietly changing direction. As though the forest itself whispered where they should go. The silver wolf remained several steps ahead. Not once did he glance backward. Yet whenever Ilara stumbled over hidden roots or loose stones, he slowed just enough for her to catch up. Hours passed. Moonlight finally spilled through breaks in the branches. The air grew colder. The ground beneath their feet slowly changed. Soft forest earth gave way to scattered stone. Towering cliffs rose around them. The scent of pine mixed with the sharp freshness of mountain streams. "We're climbing," Ilara whispered. The old traveler smiled faintly. Few people know these paths exist. They were hidden long before Ashmere became a kingdom. As if answering his words, thick mist drifted down between the rocks. Within minutes the narrow trail disappeared completely beneath swirling white clouds. Ilara could barely see a few steps ahead. Only the silver outline of the wolf guided her forward. Without him, she would have become hopelessly lost. Near midnight they reached a narrow stone bridge crossing a roaring river. The bridge looked impossibly old. Its surface had been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. No railings protected either side. Below, dark water crashed violently against jagged rocks. Ilara swallowed. This bridge can't still be standing. The old man gently touched the nearest stone. It stands because it was built before lies entered this land. She frowned. I don't understand. You will. The wolf crossed first. His paws moved with quiet certainty. Ilara followed carefully behind, gripping the edges of her cloak as cold wind swept across the gorge. Halfway across, she glanced down. Far below, moonlight shimmered across the rushing river. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw enormous shapes moving beneath the water. Not fish. Not shadows. Something much larger. Before she could look again, they were gone. The old traveler noticed her expression but said nothing. Some mysteries, she realized, revealed themselves only when they wished. By dawn they reached the mountains. The forest opened into a breathtaking valley unlike anything Ilara had ever imagined. Gentle streams wound through endless fields of silver grass. Wildflowers painted the hills in shades of blue, white, and violet. Ancient stone pillars rose from the earth in perfect circles, each carved with symbols so weathered they seemed part of the mountain itself. Mist drifted peacefully across the valley floor. No smoke. No villages. No roads. Only silence. Beautiful. Sacred. The wolf stopped at the edge of the valley. For the first time since Ilara had found him beneath the oak, he lifted his head toward the morning sky. A long, deep howl rose from his chest. It echoed across the mountains. The sound carried neither anger nor sorrow. It sounded like someone returning home. For several moments nothing happened. Then another howl answered. Far away. Then another. Closer. Another. And another. The valley awakened. From behind great stones. Between clusters of ancient pines. Across distant hills. Wolves appeared. Grey wolves. Black wolves. White wolves. Old wolves whose fur had faded almost silver with age. Young wolves whose paws barely disturbed the grass. They came without haste. Without growling. Without fear. Dozens. Then scores. Then so many Ilara stopped trying to count. Every instinct told her to retreat. Instead, she stood perfectly still. The silver guardian remained beside her. Calm. Waiting. The first wolf approached. A massive black male with a scar crossing one eye. He stopped only a few feet away. His golden gaze studied Ilara carefully. She could hear her own heartbeat. The wolf stepped closer, lowered his great head, and gently touched his nose against the back of her hand. Another wolf repeated the gesture. Then another. Soon the entire front of the gathering pack had lowered their heads before her. Not in submission. In recognition. Tears blurred Ilara's vision. They. Her voice trembled. They know me. The old traveler quietly nodded. No. They know your heart. The wolves slowly parted. A path opened through the gathering pack. The silver guardian began walking. Ilara followed. The valley grew quieter with every step. At its center stood a single stone unlike all the others. It rose nearly twice the height of a man. Its surface shimmered beneath the morning light despite countless centuries of wind. Ancient carvings covered every inch. Humans. Wolves. Trees whose roots stretched beneath mountains. Hands resting upon fur. Children walking beside great beasts. No chains. No weapons. Only trust. Ilara stepped closer. Her fingertips brushed the cool stone. The carving seemed almost warm beneath her touch. The old traveler joined her. This is the stone of the first promise. She looked at him. The promise. He drew a slow breath. Long before Ashmere had kings. Long before castles stood upon these hills. Humans and wolves shared this land. He rested his hand against the stone. The wolves protected the forests. The people protected the wolves. Neither ruled. Neither served. They lived because the other also lived. Ilara stared at the carvings. What happened? The old man's eyes filled with quiet sadness. Power. He looked toward the distant mountains. A king believed fear was easier to command than trust. He declared wolves enemies. He burned the old records. He hunted the guardians. He taught every generation that the beasts had betrayed mankind. But he smiled faintly. History can lie. Stone cannot. The silver guardian stepped beside the monument. Sunlight touched his silver coat. For one breathtaking moment, he looked exactly like the carved guardian upon the ancient stone. Not merely similar. The same. Ilara slowly turned toward the old traveler. How old is he? The old man answered softly. The guardian is never simply one wolf. When one grows old, another inherits the sacred bond. The spirit of the first promise continues. He is the last. The words settled over the valley like winter snow. The last. If he died, the line ended forever. Miles away, Lord Garrick studied the same mountains from a rocky ridge. One of his scouts knelt nearby. We found tracks. Human. 3 humans. And wolves. Many wolves. A cruel smile slowly spread across Garrick's face. So, the stories were true after all. He looked toward the mist-covered peaks. I've spent 20 years chasing ghosts. He mounted his horse. No more. He raised his hand. Nearly 200 soldiers emerged from the surrounding forest. Archers. Spearmen. Hunters carrying heavy iron traps. Behind them, wagons creaked beneath barrels marked with the royal seal. The scout frowned. My lord, those aren't arrows. Garrick's smile widened. No, they're for something much older. He placed one gloved hand upon the nearest barrel. Poisoned smoke. Enough to drive every living creature from an entire valley. Or kill those too weak to escape. He looked once more toward the hidden sanctuary. Tomorrow, he said quietly, the first pack becomes the last. Far above, an eagle circled silently over the mountains. Its sharp eyes watched the army begin its slow climb toward the valley. No human noticed. But somewhere below, the silver guardian suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the distant wind. And for the first time since reaching home, a low warning growl rolled through the sacred valley. Morning arrived without the warmth of sunrise. A heavy blanket of grey clouds drifted over the mountain peaks, swallowing the golden light before it could reach the valley below. The gentle breeze that had carried the scent of wildflowers only hours earlier now carried something colder. Smoke. Iron. Men. The silver guardian stood upon a high ridge overlooking the entrance to the valley. His powerful body remained perfectly still, but every muscle beneath his silver coat was tense. His ears twitched toward the distant cliffs where echoes traveled long before footsteps could be heard. Ilara climbed beside him, her boots slipping on the damp stones. She followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing. Only mist curling between the rocks. Then, a single flash of sunlight reflected from polished steel. Another. Then dozens more. Her breath caught. They're here. The old traveler slowly reached her side. They came faster than I feared. Far below, armored soldiers poured through the narrow mountain pass like a river of iron. Spears rose above their heads. Horses pulled heavy wagons over the rocky ground while archers spread across the ridges, searching every shadow. At their center rode Lord Gerrick. His black armor gleamed beneath the dim morning sky. His eyes never left the valley. He had not come to hunt. He had come to erase. The wolves sensed it long before the first command was shouted. Throughout the valley, ears lifted. Heads turned. The playful wrestling of young pups stopped instantly. Old wolves emerged from beneath ancient pines. Mothers quietly nudged their little ones toward hidden caves carved into the mountainside. No panic spread through the pack. Only silent preparation. They had faced hunters before, but never an army. Ilara knelt beside one frightened pup whose oversized paws made him stumble over the uneven ground. The tiny wolf looked up at her with wide amber eyes. His body trembled. She wrapped both hands gently around him. "It's all right." Her voice remained soft despite the fear tightening inside her chest. "We'll keep you safe." The pup pressed his small head against her shoulder. The Silver Guardian watched the moment in silence. Then he lifted his head. A deep howl rolled across the valley. One by one, every wolf answered. The sound rose toward the clouds until it seemed the mountains themselves had begun to sing. It was not a cry for war. It was a promise. No one would stand alone. Lord Gerrick heard the chorus from the opposite ridge. He smiled. So they gather themselves. One of his captains rode closer. "My lord, shall we surround them?" Gerrick shook his head. "No." He pointed toward the barrels loaded upon the wagons. "Bring them forward." The captain hesitated. "The poison will spread through the entire valley." "Exactly." The captain lowered his eyes. "As you command." Within minutes, soldiers rolled the heavy barrels into position. Iron lids were pried loose. A thick black smoke slowly curled upward, clinging unnaturally close to the ground before drifting toward the sanctuary. The old traveler smelled it first. His face turned pale. Not ordinary poison. Ilara looked toward him. "What is it?" "Ashroot." His voice barely escaped his lips. "It burns the lungs. It blinds. It lingers for days." The wind shifted. The smoke began slipping quietly between the ancient stones. Birds abandoned the trees. Rabbits fled from their burrows. Even the mountain streams seemed swallowed beneath the creeping darkness. Without hesitation, the Silver Guardian leaped from the ridge. His enormous body landed gracefully among the gathering wolves. A single glance passed between him and the oldest members of the pack. No words. No commands. Yet every wolf immediately understood. The strongest adult spread outward, forming a living wall between the smoke and the caves where the pups had hidden. Others raced toward narrow mountain trails, guiding injured animals away from danger. The sacred valley, peaceful only moments before, transformed into desperate movement. Ilara refused to stand still. She rushed toward the nearest cave where several elderly wolves struggled to climb over fallen stones. One old she-wolf dragged an injured back leg behind her. Each step became slower than the last. Ilara slipped beneath her shoulder despite knowing the wolf outweighed her many times over. Together they climbed. Rock by rock. Breath by breath. Behind them the poisonous smoke crawled steadily closer. The old traveler appeared carrying two frightened pups beneath his cloak. "I'll take these. You help the others." Ilara nodded. There was no time for anything else. The first arrows fell before midday. They struck the stone pillars with sharp cracks that echoed through the valley. Then another wave. Then another. Most missed their targets. That had never been Gerrick's intention. Their burning cloth wrappings set dry grass ablaze wherever they landed. Small fires quickly spread through the sanctuary. Golden smoke mixed with the black poison already drifting between the ruins. Heat replaced the mountain chill. The wolves began coughing. Even Ilara struggled to breathe. Ash settled across her cloak. The scent of burning cedar filled the air. Then came the traps. Heavy iron jaws hidden beneath scattered leaves snapped shut around the leg of a young grey wolf. His desperate cry echoed through the valley. Without thinking, Ilara ran. The frightened wolf twisted wildly, only forcing the sharp metal deeper into his leg. "Hold still." She dropped to her knees beside him. The wolf's terrified breathing came in short bursts. He looked ready to bite anything that came close. Instead, he saw Ilara. His struggling slowed. She pressed both hands against the iron jaws. The trap barely moved. It was far too heavy. She gritted her teeth. Pushed harder. Pain shot through her arms. The metal finally sprang open. The young wolf stumbled free, limping badly before disappearing toward the caves. Blood marked every step behind him. Ilara looked down. Her own palms had been torn open by the sharp iron teeth. Fresh blood dripped onto the ancient stones. She barely noticed. Across the valley, the Silver Guardian crashed into the first line of soldiers. He moved like flowing water. One powerful leap carried him over lowered spears. Another swept two men from their feet without killing them. He never lingered. Never attacked those already helpless. His only purpose was to force them backward. The soldiers had expected a beast driven by rage. Instead, they faced something disciplined. Controlled. Almost. Noble. Even Garrick frowned. He refuses to kill. One archer lowered his bow. "My lord. He could have taken my throat. But he didn't." Garrick's expression hardened. Then his weaker than the stories claimed. He drew another spear from his saddle. This one gleamed darker than the first. Poison coated its blade. This time. He doesn't survive. The battle spread deeper into the sanctuary. Stone arches that had stood untouched for centuries cracked beneath flaming arrows. Ancient carvings blackened beneath the smoke. One enormous pillar finally gave way with a thunderous roar. Chunks of stone crashed onto the valley floor. Dust exploded into the air. Several wolves disappeared beneath the rubble. Ilara rushed forward. Ignoring the falling debris. Ignoring the soldiers. She clawed desperately at broken stones with bleeding hands. A faint whimper answered her. "There!" Together with the old traveler, she pulled away rock after rock. At last, a small white pup crawled into her arms. His tiny body shook violently beneath the dust. Behind him, his mother remained trapped. A massive stone pinned her hindquarters. The she-wolf looked directly at Ilara. There was no fear in her eyes. Only one silent plea. "Save him." Ilara placed the pup gently into the old traveler's arms. Then she pushed against the stone. It did not move. She tried again. Nothing. The Silver Guardian appeared beside her. Without hesitation, he lowered one powerful shoulder beneath the fallen pillar. Every muscle along his body tightened. Slowly, the stone shifted. Only a few inches. It was enough. The trapped mother dragged herself free. She collapsed beside her pup, exhausted but alive. The Guardian stepped away. His wounded shoulder trembled beneath the weight he had carried. Fresh blood soaked through the bandages. Ilara saw it immediately. "No." She hurried toward him. The old wound had opened. Dark crimson spread across his silver fur. He remained standing. But barely. The old traveler pointed toward the center of the sanctuary. The heart stone. Ilara followed his gaze. There, surrounded by broken pillars, stood the largest monument in the valley. Its surface glowed faintly beneath layers of ash. "The carvings." She whispered. "They're changing." Fresh lines of light slowly spread across the ancient stone. Symbols hidden for centuries awakened one after another. The old man's face filled with awe. "It remembers." Ilara stepped closer. The glowing carvings revealed images never seen before. A great darkness beneath the mountains. Not smoke. Not shadow. Something alive. Something imprisoned. The first guardian stood around it beside human kings, their hands resting upon wolves as together they sealed the darkness beneath the earth. The old traveler spoke with quiet reverence. "This is why the guardians exist." Ilara stared at the glowing images. They weren't protecting themselves. No, they were protecting everyone. His eyes turned toward the silver wolf. If the last guardian falls, the prison falls with him. A deep rumble rolled beneath the valley. Not thunder. The mountain itself. Cracks spread across the earth. The glowing carvings flickered. The air suddenly became colder. Much colder. Lord Garrick, standing atop the ridge, laughed as he watched the sanctuary begin to collapse. So, the legends were true after all. He lifted his poisoned spear once more. This ends today. The Silver Guardian slowly turned toward him. Though weakened, though bleeding, he stepped forward. Between Garrick and the awakening darkness beneath the mountain. The mountain trembled again. This time the sound did not end with a single rumble. It continued beneath the earth like the slow heartbeat of some ancient giant waking from an endless sleep. Dust drifted from the cliffs surrounding the sanctuary, and thin cracks crept across the weathered stones beneath Ilara's feet. The glowing carvings on the heart stone pulsed brighter. For a single breath, every living thing in the valley fell silent. No birds. No wind. Even the frightened wolves stopped moving. The silence felt unnatural, as though the world itself was listening. Then, a deep crack split the center of the sanctuary. The ground opened several feet before sealing again. A blast of icy air rushed upward from beneath the mountain. It smelled of damp stone and forgotten centuries. The old traveler staggered backward, gripping his staff so tightly his knuckles turned white. "It remembers," he whispered. "It has begun to wake." Ilara looked toward him. "What has?" Before he could answer, the heart stone flashed with brilliant silver light. Images spread across its surface, not carved by human hands but moving like reflections upon still water. She saw kings kneeling beside wolves, children placing flowers at the paws of great guardians, villages built without walls because fear had not yet entered men's hearts. Then the vision changed. Flames, spears, burning forests. A crowned king raising his sword while frightened crowds shouted for the wolves to die. History itself unfolded before her eyes. Not the history taught inside Ashmir's castles. The truth. The old traveler stepped beside her. Every generation heard only half the story. The half written by frightened rulers. He rested one trembling hand upon the glowing stone. The wolves never betrayed mankind. Mankind abandoned its promise. Ilara looked toward the Silver Guardian. His chest rose heavily with each breath. Fresh blood still slipped through his silver fur, dripping onto the ancient earth. Everything had begun with that betrayal. Across the valley, Lord Garrick lowered his spear. For the first time since entering the sanctuary, uncertainty crossed his face. The earth beneath his horse refused to stay still. Small stones rolled downhill without touching anyone. The animals that had fled the smoke now gathered along the distant ridges instead of escaping farther away. They were watching. Waiting. One of Garrick's oldest captains slowly approached. "My lord." "The men are frightened." Garrick's eyes never left the glowing heart stone. "They are soldiers. They obey." The captain hesitated. "They've begun asking why the wolves protect children instead of attacking them." "And why?" His voice nearly disappeared. "The Guardian spared the men he defeated." Garrick slowly turned. His cold stare silenced every remaining word. "You've hunted beside me for 15 years. Answer me." The captain swallowed. "Yes, my lord." "What creates a better kingdom? Mercy or fear?" The captain lowered his eyes. Before he could answer, Garrick struck him across the face with the back of his armored glove. The older man fell heavily onto the stones. "Fear." Garrick looked toward the gathered soldiers. "It has always been fear. But fear only survives." He raised his poisoned spear. "When witnesses disappear." The order echoed through the valley. "Burn everything." Torches flew through the air. Dry brush burst into flames. The fire spread with terrifying speed across the outer edges of the sanctuary, swallowing ancient grasslands that had remained untouched for centuries. Dark smoke climbed toward the grey sky. Wolves rushed to move their youngest toward higher ground. Ilara grabbed 2 frightened pups, wrapping them inside her cloak before racing toward a narrow passage between towering rocks. Behind her, the old traveler guided the elderly wolves through hidden trails known only to the first pack. The Silver Guardian never followed. Instead, he ran toward the flames, not away from them. A burning tree crashed across the main path, trapping 3 young wolves beneath its heavy branches. Without hesitation, the Guardian threw himself against the blazing trunk. Fire raced across his silver coat. The smell of burning fur filled the air. Still he pushed. Again. Again. Finally the tree rolled aside. The trapped wolves scrambled free. The Guardian staggered. His legs nearly collapsed beneath him. Yet he continued forward. Every step cost him another drop of strength. Every life he saved took something from his own. Ilara watched from across the valley. Tears blurred her vision. "Please," she whispered through trembling lips. "You've given enough." But the Guardian did not stop. Some promises were worth every sacrifice. The battle no longer belonged only to wolves and soldiers. The mountain itself had become part of the struggle. Large cracks split open along the cliffs. Ancient statues toppled into the valley below. Pieces of the heart stone broke away, revealing brilliant silver light beneath the weathered surface. The old traveler stared in awe. "It is choosing." Ilara looked toward him. "What do you mean?" "The promise has always needed 2 guardians." He smiled sadly. "1 wolf. And 1 human." Her heart skipped. "No." He nodded gently. "The wolves have waited generations. They weren't waiting for a king. They were waiting." His eyes rested upon her. For someone whose kindness came without reward. Before Ilara could answer, another violent tremor threw everyone to the ground. A deafening roar erupted beneath the mountain. From the largest crack rose something darker than smoke. It twisted upward like living shadow before dissolving into the storm clouds overhead. Every horse screamed in terror. Several soldiers dropped their weapons and fled. Even Garrick's face lost its confidence. The darkness had not escaped completely, but the prison holding it had weakened. Exactly as the carvings had warned. Far below the sanctuary, another struggle unfolded. Several frightened soldiers had become trapped beneath a collapsed stone arch. The fire spread toward them. One young archer desperately tried lifting the heavy beams pinning his friend. It would not move. The flames came closer. The young man closed his eyes. Then, a massive silver shape appeared through the smoke. The Guardian. The soldiers froze. One whispered, "Please." The Guardian did not attack. He lowered his shoulder beneath the burning beam. With one final surge of strength, he lifted it. The trapped soldiers crawled free. They stared at the wolf in disbelief. The Guardian stepped back. His injured legs trembled violently. The rescued soldiers looked at one another. None raised a weapon. Instead, the youngest slowly removed his helmet. Then his sword. He placed both upon the ground. One by one, others followed. Within moments nearly half the hunting force had lowered their weapons. The truth needed no words. It stood before them breathing through pain, saving the very men sent to kill it. Lord Garrick saw everything. His face twisted with rage. "Cowards!" He drew another spear. "You've forgotten your orders." No one moved. An older soldier stepped forward. "My lord. That creature has shown us more honor than we have shown him." Another nodded. "We cannot continue." Garrick's hand tightened around the poisoned spear. "You serve the crown." The older soldier met his gaze. "We serve justice." Silence spread across the battlefield. For the first time in many years, Lord Garrick stood alone. His eyes slowly found Ilara. She was kneeling beside the wounded Guardian, replacing the blood-soaked bandages around his shoulder. The wolf lowered his great head, trusting her completely despite the chaos surrounding them. Hatred hardened Garrick's expression. "If I cannot destroy the pack," he whispered, "I'll destroy its heart." He climbed onto a fallen stone pillar overlooking the sanctuary. The distance was perfect. His arm drew back. The poisoned spear gleamed beneath the dark sky. No one saw him. Not the soldiers. Not the wolves. Only the old traveler. His eyes widened. Ilara. She turned. Too late. The spear flew. It cut through the smoky air with terrifying speed, aimed not at the Guardian, but at her. The silver wolf reacted instantly. His powerful body launched forward. Ilara looked up just as the Guardian crashed into her. They rolled across the broken stones. The spear missed her by inches. Instead, it buried itself deep into the Guardian's side. A terrible silence followed. The wolf collapsed. His breathing stopped for one endless heartbeat, then returned in a weak, painful gasp. Ilara crawled toward him, her hands already stained with fresh blood. No. Her voice broke. No, please. The Guardian looked into her eyes. There was no fear there, only quiet peace, as though he had already accepted the price of protecting her. Around them, every wolf in the sanctuary lifted its head. Their sorrowful howls rose together beneath the darkening sky, echoing through the mountains with such heartbreaking grief that even hardened soldiers lowered their heads. High above the valley, the storm clouds split apart for a single moment. A pale shaft of sunlight reached through the darkness. It fell directly upon Ilara and the dying Guardian. The single beam of sunlight rested upon the Guardian like a blessing from a forgotten age. Everywhere else, smoke still drifted through the shattered sanctuary. Broken pillars lay scattered across the valley floor, and the fires continued to consume patches of dry grass. Yet within that circle of pale golden light, everything seemed strangely still. Ilara dropped to her knees beside the fallen wolf. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely reach the poisoned spear buried in his side. Blood soaked through her sleeves. Warm. Far too warm. No. The word escaped her as little more than a broken breath. You've carried this kingdom long enough. The Guardian's chest rose only slightly. His golden eyes searched her face. Even now, with death standing beside him, they held no anger. Only trust. Only the same quiet kindness she had seen beneath the ancient oak. Tears rolled freely down Ilara's cheeks. She pressed both hands against the wound, trying desperately to slow the bleeding. Stay with me. The wolf's breathing grew weaker. Around them, the pack gathered in complete silence. No growls. No cries. The oldest wolves lowered themselves onto the cold earth. The youngest pressed close to their mothers. Even the mountain wind seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. The old traveler slowly approached. He stopped beside the heartstone and closed his eyes. The promise, he whispered, has reached its final hour. Ilara looked toward him through tear-filled eyes. There has to be another way. There always was. His voice carried both sorrow and hope. But it has never belonged to the Guardian alone. He rested his weathered hand upon the glowing stone. Its silver light spread beneath his fingers. The first promise was made by two hearts. One human. One Guardian. When one gives everything, the other must choose. Ilara stared at him. I don't understand. You will. The old traveler stepped aside. The Heartstone remembers every promise ever kept. It does not answer to kings. It answers to sacrifice. The glowing carvings began moving once more. This time they no longer showed the past. They showed her. She saw herself as a little girl gathering herbs beside her mother. She saw her father gently placing an injured bird back into its nest. She saw countless strangers whose wounds she had treated without asking for payment. Every quiet act of kindness. Every forgotten moment. Nothing had been lost. The mountain itself had remembered. The silver light spread from the Heartstone across the broken ground until it reached Ilara's knees. Then, it touched the Guardian. A warm breeze swept through the ruined sanctuary. The smell of smoke faded. Wildflowers bent gently beneath the wind. The old traveler smiled. It has accepted you. Ilara looked down at the Guardian. What do I do? Nothing born from fear. He answered softly. Only what your heart has always done. She closed her eyes. Not to ask for power. Not to ask for victory. Only to ask that another life might continue. She placed one hand over the Guardian's wounded side. The other rested upon the glowing stone. I made one choice beneath an old oak, she whispered. I would make it again. If this land still needs its guardian, then let him live. A brilliant light burst from the Heartstone. Not blinding. Warm. Gentle. It flowed through Alara like the first sunlight after a long winter, carrying neither pain nor weight. The silver glow spread across the Guardian's body. The poison darkening his wound slowly retreated. Blood stopped flowing. The torn flesh began closing before everyone's eyes. The wolves lifted their heads together. Soft whimpers of hope echoed through the valley. The Guardian drew one deep breath. Then another. His eyes opened. Brighter than before. For a long moment he simply looked at Alara. Then, with great care, he raised his head and gently rested it against her shoulder. Alara wrapped both arms around his neck. She laughed through her tears. Around them, the valley answered with a chorus unlike any heard for generations. Not cries of grief. Not calls to battle. Songs of home. Lord Gerrick watched everything from the shattered ridge. Disbelief twisted across his face. This, he whispered, is impossible. The Heartstone flared once more. The ancient carvings shone brighter than the sun itself. The deep cracks running across the sanctuary began closing. The trembling mountain slowly grew still. Far below, the black shadow that had tried to rise from beneath the earth let out one final, distant roar before dissolving into nothing. The prison had been restored. Not through violence. Through compassion. Gerrick's hands shook. Everything he had built his life upon had collapsed in a single afternoon. The stories. The hatred. The glory he had promised himself. All of it had been a lie. Still, pride refused to surrender. With a cry filled more with desperation than courage, he drew his sword and charged down the broken slope. If the wolf lives, then I'll finish it myself. The remaining loyal soldiers hesitated. None followed him. He reached the sanctuary alone. His boots struck the ancient stones as he raised his sword high above his head. The blade never fell. One of his own captains stepped into his path. Then another. Then another. Soon every remaining soldier stood between Gerrick and the Guardian. The oldest captain slowly removed the royal crest from his armor. His weathered face showed deep disappointment. It ends here. Gerrick stared at them. You would betray your commander. The captain answered quietly. No. You betrayed the kingdom. Another soldier lowered his eyes. We hunted protectors. A third stepped forward. We believed lies because they were easier than truth. Gerrick looked around desperately. No one stood beside him. Not one. His sword suddenly felt far heavier than iron. The aging king himself arrived before sunset, escorted by the royal guard. News of the strange battle and the trembling mountains had reached the capital hours earlier. He stepped from his carriage slowly, leaning upon an oak staff carved with the crest of Ashmere. The old traveller bowed. So, the king said quietly as his eyes settled upon the Heartstone. The oldest stories were true. No one answered. None needed to. The king walked toward the Guardian. The great silver wolf remained still. He did not bare his teeth. He simply watched. The king removed his crown. Not completely. Only enough to lower his head in respect. A silence deeper than any ceremony settled across the valley. I inherited a throne. The king said softly. But not the truth. He turned toward Gerrick. You hunted loyalty. You called it justice. His voice grew firm. Lord Gerrick. By the authority of the crown. You are stripped of rank. Stripped of title. And sentenced to spend the remainder of your days rebuilding every village your fear helped destroy. The former commander fell to his knees. Not because soldiers forced him. Because there was nothing left to stand upon. The kingdom had judged him. The truth had judged him more deeply still. Autumn slowly surrendered to winter. Snow returned gently to the mountains. Yet this time the forests did not feel empty. The old hunting notices disappeared from village gates. Children no longer hid whenever distant howls echoed beneath the moon. Instead, elders began telling the true story around evening fires. Not of a cursed beast, but of the last guardian, and the healer who refused to abandon him. The ancient alliance was restored little by little. Woodcutters left part of each harvest at the forest's edge as thanks. Hunters no longer crossed into sacred valleys. Travelers who became lost sometimes discovered enormous wolf tracks leading them safely back toward familiar roads. Whether the wolves truly guided them, or whether hope simply helped people find their way, no one could say. The old traveler quietly disappeared one spring morning. His walking staff remained leaning against the hearthstone. Nothing else. Some believed he had died. Others smiled and said the forest had simply called one of its oldest friends home. No one searched. Some mysteries deserved peace. Ilara returned to the edge of Greenwood. She rebuilt her little stone cottage with the help of villagers who once feared the forest. Its garden bloomed larger than ever before. Lavender swayed beside rosemary. Foxgloves stood beside white lilies that seemed to bloom no matter the season. People came from distant kingdoms seeking her healing hands. She accepted no more payment than she ever had. A loaf of bread. A basket of apples. Sometimes only a grateful smile. Nothing about her kindness changed because the world finally noticed it. Some evenings she sat beneath the same ancient oak where everything had begun. The scars on the tree remained. So did the memories. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, a familiar figure would appear between the pines. The Silver Guardian. His steps were quiet. His once wounded shoulder had healed, though a thin white scar still crossed his fur like a line of moonlight. He would walk to her without hurry, without fear. Ilara would smile before he even reached the clearing. "You always know where to find me." The Guardian lowered his great head. His nose gently touched her open hand. No words were needed. The forest understood. The wind understood. So did they. On every full moon, the entire pack gathered upon the distant hills overlooking her cottage. Silver, grey, black. Young wolves chasing one another through the grass while the elders watched quietly from the shadows. Travelers sometimes caught sight of them. Instead of reaching for weapons, they simply stood still. Many placed a hand over their heart. A silent greeting. A promise remembered. Years later, children would ask why wolves no longer feared the villages of Ashmere. Their grandparents would smile and point toward the Greenwood wilds glowing beneath the moon. They would tell the story of a healer who chose compassion over gold, of a guardian who answered hatred with mercy, and of the day an entire kingdom learned that the strongest soul was never the one that carried the sharpest sword. It was the one willing to kneel beside a wounded stranger when everyone else had already decided that stranger deserved to die. And whenever the moonlight touched the ancient oak where a frightened young woman had once reached out a trembling hand instead of turning away, the leaves whispered softly in the night breeze, as though the forest itself still remembered the promise that had saved not only a wolf, but a kingdom.